All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick are in our 2025 preview and prediction for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Getting things started with this staff. Kalen, DeBoer, a monumental coaching record over his career, enters his second season. Ryan Grubb will now be joining the staff as the offensive coordinator along with Nick Sheridan. And then Kane Womack, Maurice Linguist will be sharing the DC responsibilities. 2024, bit disappointing season for them, 9-4. Missed the college football playoff, even though they had a teed-up opportunity. They ended up blowing it late in the year, ended up losing in the bowl game as well. Third-ranked recruiting class from high school, and then the 20th-ranked class in the portal. So some good stuff done this offseason by the Tide to keep this roster in good standing. Getting things started with the offense, Nick. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see some, relatively impressive numbers, right? But I feel like you could throw those out the window if you watch this team weekly, which me and you, we both did for the most part. This is a team that at times, they just could not do anything right, Nick. I would text you frequently saying they can't pass, they can't run, they can't pass block, they can't run block. I mean, the offense was just horrid at times. There was only really two games where this team played complete football. That was against Wisconsin and LSU, games that we figured would kind of be blowouts due to the matchups that they had. But throughout the year, this offense was just incredibly inconsistent. I know Ryan Grubb coming over is certainly going to help with the play calling, but the overall chemistry and communication from the entire unit has to be better. It's not just going to be a play caller that's going to change everything, Nick. They're going to have a lot better from everybody, and that's going to start with Ty Simpson slotting in here at quarterback. This is a guy who's sat and has waited his turn, and we think he's going to do quite well. He's got good athletic ability. He can run. He has some very good speed, nice footwork, throws to the boundary of anticipation well. I think he has some underrated arm strength as well. Does a good job scrambling, had a few good throws on the run. That's from limited tape that we have over the past couple of years of Ty Simpson. I think he's going to be a pretty good fit for this offense, Nick. What do you make of him as the new starter for this football team and some of the notes that I labeled about this 2024 offense?
When I look at Ty Simpson, I think this is a guy that could really excel in this system. The system will certainly shelter him a little bit that they're going to run here with the new offensive coordinator. I think, bringing Grubb in, who did not have a good tenure in the NFL at Seattle, it was a really good add. He was originally supposed to be the offensive coordinator, of course, ended up bouncing and bolting for Seattle to coach in the NFL last year. Did not work out for him. That Seahawks offense really wasn't that good. And now he comes back to the college game, back with DeBoer, a guy that he spent a lot of time with, coached it, back at Sioux Falls, then Fresno State, then Washington. They've been together for a while, these two, so they know each other very well. They know what they're doing, and they work well together. I think this will be really solid. I think Grubb will implement a really strong system for a guy that's, like you said, sat around, waited his turn, learned the playbook, and got comfortable here. In an era where a lot of quarterbacks are transferring and jumping at the gun at the first chance they get to, Ty Simpson sat and learned the playbook, sat on the bench, and learned to wait his opportunity, and now he's got this opportunity. Jalen Milroe, as much as a phenomenal athlete as he is, he was a liability in the passing game. The 11 interceptions last year will certainly be a part of that. He had issues in some of those key games you spoke about, had issues in the Tennessee game, which was a loss, certainly had issues in the losses at Vanderbilt, threw a bad pick six early in that game, threw a bad pick six, and even worse pick six, you could argue, in the Oklahoma game where Alabama was completely lost in that matchup, where he got in his own head sometimes. Milroe was certainly like, a Jekyll and Hyde approach, where sometimes, like the LSU game, he'd be playing absolutely on fire, or the first half of the Georgia game, where he'd be playing absolutely on fire, even the Missouri game, where he looked really good in that one. But then when he was playing bad football, this team was suffering, the offensive line was suffering, they were making mistakes. Look at the USF game, the offensive line struggled mightily in that game. Tons of penalties, tons of mistakes over and over again. If the offensive line play can be strong, and we'll talk about them in a little bit, they can protect Ty Simpson. I think the system that's in place here with this new offensive coordinator will really benefit him. There's a solid amount of weapons returning, running the ball, and catching the ball for this offense. I think Ty Simpson has a real opportunity to plug in here and be a very strong quarterback. A lot of people in the media have said this, and you and I have discussed this as well. If the quarterback play is really good on this team can certainly reach high expectations and make the college football playoff. If the quarterback play is not up to snuff and it's not good enough in the SEC, this team will be back to an 8-9 win team struggling in a bowl game.
Pretty good quarterback room as well. Austin Max had a really good spring. Keelan Russell, a 5-star, is in the wings as well. So very talented quarterback room. You look at the supporting cast. At times, they just didn't perform very well last year. Jam Miller, this is going to be the lead back coming into 25. Gets upfield with urgency. Seems to get excited when he sees the opening gaps. Good second-level speed, has a nice, strong lower half. Really makes defenders pay who try to tackle him low. I like his ball security as well. The rest of this group, Richard Young, has been used sparingly this far. He's a one-cut inside power back, 216 pounds. Dre Washington, some solid career production for being, a number 2 and number 3 back at his previous school. 224-pounder, comes from a heavy zone rushing attack, so it's a good fit, I think, here with Alabama. Ackland Deer, he might get involved early as the second-ranked running back in this freshman class. He's a strong, powerful player who has got elusiveness and some good speed. Respectable running back room here, Nick. At times, though, it just seemed like throughout the year, again, they couldn't run the ball all that well. And I think the running backs, they just weren't giving 100% effort at times. I remember watching that in the Georgia game, even in the Vanderbilt game too. It's like, why are we not running the ball better? These running backs should be putting up better effort. The team still had 41 rushing touchdowns. It's one of the higher marks in the country. This backfield, though, I expect a lot more out of them.
I expect a lot more of this backfield. I think it's certainly a high expectation, an expectation that should happen. I think these are two solid backs that they return to start things off for this offense that could be involved early on in Jam Miller and Richard Young. I think these are two guys that got good reps last year, have some solid experience. Miller, had about 670 yards on the ground, 4.6 yards per carry, and 7 scores. Also had a receiving touchdown last year, while Richard Young had 150 yards rushing and 2 scores. I think these are two solid backs. So you plug these guys in, they could be really solid in this offense. They add Washington from Louisiana, who I think was a really solid add. Had 5 rushing touchdowns last year and about 500 yards, 6.5 yards per carry, which I think is a really solid number for him. I want to see what he can look like inside this offense. This is not a room that will scream at you off the paper as like, wow, this is a top tier running back room in the country, because it's not. It's an average running back group that I think can certainly exceed expectations to be really strong this year. I think I have a lot of high expectations for Miller that could really go out there and be strong early on. This team has to find a way to run the football to relieve some of that pressure on Ty Simpson, who is getting his feet wet still playing in SEC football. Have to have a strong rushing attack if this team wants to go far in college football playoff.
Now look at this wide receiver group. Of course, you want to start with Ryan Williams, who over the first 5 games of last year looked like one of the greatest players I've ever seen. That play against Georgia was one of the greatest plays I've ever seen, Nick, of all time. That one where they blew that lead, right? They were up big and they blew the lead, and he had to make a play there to swing momentum and win the game. I mean, just unreal. Athletic freak. He has a large catch radius. Great contested catch player on the boundary. Showed poor hands, though, with 7 drops. Late in the season, he was not very reliable. You also want to see him continue to bulk up. He's a great separator, but at times it was more difficult. Again, the first 5 weeks, Nick, he was phenomenal, but the back half of the year, not as much. Only had 3 games of over 50 yards. Had a season-high 8 catches against Tennessee, but that was on like 20 targets. So his production in the back half of the year really dipped. And they certainly could have utilized him a lot more because they ended up losing 2 of those games. We wish he would have produced a little bit more. Derek Meadows, a true freshman, I think is going to come in and be great for them. A guy who's 6'5", 200, has nice body control, nice athlete, strong ability to catch in traffic as well. Gurmy Bernard, though, he really stepped up in the back half of the season while Williams was disappointing. Versatile, but hopefully he can be a consistent slot weapon for them. Showed great hands throughout the season. He's a veteran in this scheme as well. Isaiah Horton coming over from Miami, 6'4", 205. He's a pure outside wide receiver, which is good. They need a number 2 that can be in that Z role. Good catch radius, a nice route runner as well. Coming off a great year for the Hurricanes, should give this offense a boost with his skill. Depth is pretty concerning with this group. Modest producers that are going to be important during the long stretch of the season. Jalen Hill missed last year with injury, hoping he can bring some speed to the table. Excited for the transition of ex-5-star corner Jalen McBoxley. He's going to be playing a lot more receiver this year. Good hands and athletic ability. And then Cole Adams returns from an injury. Still a relatively lackluster room, but if Meadows and Mbakwe can step up, Nick, I think this can be a great room. I think they're in a much better spot than they were last year, though, overall as a room. What do you make of these weapons?
Yeah, I think this is a room that's in a better spot than last year. Like you said, Ryan Williams, of course, really blitzed onto the scene. That play that you were referencing against Georgia, where he made that incredible play where Alabama had just went down. They went for a big shot early on. First play of that drive, he catches the ball, and I was already excited as Alabama fan because I'm saying, okay, great, we're almost in field goal range already. But then he makes that spin move. The 2 defenders basically tackle each other for Georgia, and he's off to the races and scores. And Bryant Denny absolutely lit up. You could hear it through the TV. Just a phenomenal moment. One of the best plays in college football history, and certainly in Alabama history and recent history. A phenomenal play, an iconic play. But I do think some of the the media hype and some of the attention got to his head in the second half of the season. Like you said, that Tennessee game was brutal. A lot of drops. Milroe was sort of forcing the ball to him, but he wasn't helping himself out, making bad plays, dropping the ball. Did not have a great second half of the season, and 66 yards per game is certainly a number a little bit less than you were hoping for. Still had 865 on the year and 18 yards per grab, which is really good for Ryan Williams. Had 8 touchdowns and had 2 additional touchdowns on sort of like those jet sweep type plays. So 10 total touchdowns on the year, really solid numbers. Jeremy Bernard, we wondered what he was going to look like slotting into this offense. Got a slow start, but really came around towards the back half of the season. 800 yards receiving, 16 yards per grab, and 2 scores for him. Want to see what his output can look like this year. I'm expecting a bigger load from him overall. two guys that towards the bottom of the stat sheet last year, Cole Adams, Rico Scott. I think those are two guys that could really be involved. Cole Adams was injured last year, but I'm expecting him to potentially step up and be involved. Rico Scott only played 4 games, preserved the red shirt, but he still was productive at times in those games, had 60 yards on 5 grabs and a touchdown. So not bad numbers at all. I think he could really be a guy that you could see continue to develop his role further down the depth chart. I really think this was a solid add. And Horton, from Miami, this is a guy that's really solid overall. Had 616 yards receiving last year and 5 touchdowns. The average, of course, is probably not as high as you'd like at 11 yards per grab, but still a player that I think could really develop in this offense and could be a solid threat for them at the wide receiver X position. And obviously bringing over Mbakwe from the defense, converting him to wide receiver, seeing what he can do. I think he's going to be a really fun player to watch, a very versatile athlete that could plug into there at the Z, sometimes make some trick plays out of him. I'm excited for this wide receiver room. This is a really good unit, and if Ryan Williams can play up to that potential you saw in September of last year, he could really be a high-flying wide receiver, one of the best in college football.
Now let's look at this offensive line. Overall, it was a disappointing unit. Pass pro was inconsistent. Pushing the run game wasn't evident really at all. If they didn't have Milroe, the run game, I think, would have been one of the worst in the country, quite frankly. He really made things easier for them. They do return 3 starters, though. Caden Proctor, left tackle, he got out of his stance much quicker this past season. Latched on and moved laterally well. Gets to the second level quickly and does well as a lead blocker if has athletic ability. He can be a mauler in the run game, especially while moving vertically. He can be susceptible to speed rushers, though. Really want to see him take his game to the next level in his 3rd year. Parker Brailsford at center showcases good leg drive, a nice motor. With a bit of twitch, good athletic ability, good pass blocker. Wasn't good at all versus bull rushers. He's undersized at 6'2", 275. He's been a good player for a couple years, though, for DeBoer. And, of course, at right guard, Jaden Roberts. This guy's phenomenal, 6'5", 310. Good length. Wasn't as sturdy as a pass blocker as he was in 2023, but he's an impressive run blocker due to a very explosive first step. Those are 3 key guys Nick I really like. Left guard's going to be up for grabs. Tyler Booker got drafted early in the 1st round. Cam Dewberry comes over from Texas A&M, 6'5", 330. That's great size, lots of experience. He was relatively average, though, for the Aggies. He's been all right in pass protection. Big role for him. Right tackle is the biggest question mark on the O-line because it was one of the worst spots, one of the worst individual positions in this conference of any team. Elijah Pritchett was terrible. Wilkin Thornby wasn't very good. He ends up returning to school, and right now it looks like he's going to be the favorite for that position. They did add Ercole Engwarm from Ball State, 6'7", 321, but his only FBS experience is 100 snaps for Ball State last year. They got a 5-star Michael Carroll. He's a guard, has some good size. They could move him to tackle if need be. Of course, they ended up landing a couple of 4-stars at tackle. Gino Van Denmark has good versatility. He's back. Depth is pretty good, Nick, because of a lot of the young recruits they brought in, but the guys you see to the right of your screen, that's going to be the starting lineup. Right tackle is a big concern for me. What's your thoughts on the overall starting 5?
Yeah, I think right tackle and left guard are 2 big question marks. I really feel good about left tackle, center, and right guard. I think Roberts is one of the best in the conference. Like you said, you gave him all the plaudits for a proper reason. He stands out in the film. He's a phenomenal right guard, really good protection there, a great asset. Brailsford, a bit shaky at times, but I think he had a good season last year. I think there's a lot of room for him to grow. Caden Proctor continues to take leaps and bounds forward in his career. He really impressed me a lot last year. He's only going to get better as time goes on. I'm expecting another huge season out of him. It's right tackle and left guard where the big concerns. I'll start with left guard, where I feel a little bit better about. I think Dewberry was a good add from A&M. This is a guy that I think has a lot of high upside, a solid player, 6'4", 350 roughly. He got some good reps for A&M last year, good SEC reps, a really solid add out of the portal, a guy that's been around that program for a little bit here. I think he could be a really good player. I think you plug him at left guard. Outside of that, maybe Casey Poe kicks in at left guard. I don't know if you really want to rely on a guy like that who didn't have a whole lot of reps last year. I think Dewberry is a really solid asset. You're going to plug him in at left guard. Makes sense for me. Right tackle is your big question mark. Wilkin Thornby was not good in the snaps he played. A guy that's from the local area. He's from Tuscaloosa. He just did not play good football when he was out on the field. He struggled against USF, was really not good in that game, was very shaky at all. I don't trust bringing a guy from Ball State who does not have a whole lot of experience either. I think you rock with Thornby for now, but I'm certainly concerned about it. Carroll, a high-end 5-star that could potentially play at right tackle. Maybe you kick him out if you need to. I think you roll with Thornby for now, but that's certainly the weakest position on this team and the weakest position on this offense. I'm a little worried about right tackle. We'll have to keep an eye on that as the season develops.
The thing about Thornby, though, is you're playing at Bama. You're destined to improve, so I'm optimistic for sure. Right tackle, though, those guys gave up a combined 41 pressures. That's just abysmal, so the only better out of that. Offensive verdict from me, the unit was disappointing last year. Now the top playmaker is gone, but the Tide are capable of being a cohesive unit, and they should be in DeBoer's 2nd year alongside Grubb coming to join this staff. Quarterback room is encouraging, while the wide receiver room got better. And if this offensive line can play harder and better on a consistent basis, you'll see a run game that also possesses the talent, the ability to really take over and show good balance. Good unit here, Nick. I'm only going to give it a B+, just because I've had enough of just overestimating this team and them disappointing me. So I'm going to go with a more modest approach this year. B+. A+, of course, is going to be the ceiling, though. It's pretty high.
I think this is a B+ unit that can get to an A+. This is a very good unit. If Ty Simpson plays up to the level that I expect out of him, this offense could be really flying. I think the wide receiver room is quite strong. I think they also have a solid tight end, Josh Cuevas, who is a really good asset for this offense. I think Jam Miller and Richard Young could be really good backs to take a step forward. Dre Washington, I love that add out of the portal. I think all the offensive portal ads are really solid, including Dewberry and Horton, who could step up and be involved early on. I think Ryan Williams will mature and show that consistency all season long. If the quarterback play is up to par that we expect, this team will be in the college football playoff. If the quarterback play struggles, this team will struggle. I think that's really going to live and die by how successful Ty Simpson is when he goes out on the field in September or late August. If you really want to get technical about it, I think this is a very good offense that has a lot of expectations. I like the play calling. Adding Grubb should really do a lot for this offense. I'm excited to see what they look like.
Moving to the defensive side of the ball for the Crimson Tide. This is another group that put up some relatively impressive numbers and for the most part was a good unit, but they just lacked consistency, and I think that was a big problem for the Tide. And we'll start with up front because this is an incredibly deep defensive line, at least it was last year, and still kind of is. This team overall returns 8 starters on this side of the ball, but they struggled against the run. Nick, you seen it early against USF. They got grinded down on Vanderbilt. They just kept putting them in third and short situations, and they kept converting every time. They grinded Bama down. Oklahoma, they took the exact same playbook from Vanderbilt, and that's how they ended up beating, the brakes off of them, knocked them out of the CFP. And then Tennessee, late in that game, they started to really get things going on the ground. So the run defense needs to really step up here in conference play. And I think they have the bodies that are capable of doing so. LT Overton showcases a great motor, plays really hard. I like his power. He does a good job of staying square on opposing linemen, especially versus the run. 6'5", 283, showcases some nice explosion, can play inside or out. He's going to be a big breakout player for them this year. He had some big-time plays in 24. On the interior, Tim Keenan was an elite run defender. Shorter player at 6'2", but he's 326 pounds, has good leg drive, fights the hands well. James Smith was solid, now enters his third year as a former high-ranked recruit. Jeremiah Beeman didn't play much in his freshman season, but they're both nearly 300 pounds. Edric Hill is expected to get on the field more in his third year with the program. Has good quickness and should be a good penetrator. You look at some of the more edge guys, Q Rasaw, he's an X5-star. He was a good run defender last year. Should be that top Wolf linebacker option, Womack's defense. He's got twitch and power. Jamarian Latham, he was solid but nothing crazy in his extended playing time. Yanze Pierre, another X5-star with elite athletic ability and burst, barely played last fall. And it's just an incredibly deep defensive end group, Nick. You also have Keon Keeley, who's a 5-star. Jordan Renard is a nice addition for this group. Kelby Collins is a big body from Florida. He was solid in his time. D-line is too talented not to be elite versus the run, Nick, and have an effective pass rush. At times, we just didn't see that last year. Would you blame that on the youth, or is there a problem with this coaching staff or something else?
I think it might have been the coaching transition, but you're right. This unit is too talented not to produce, and it is a really good unit that has a lot of big bodies. You know what an Alabama defense can do, and I think even in the post-Saban era, the defenses will still be vaunted down there in Tuscaloosa. LT Overton is a phenomenal player that returns 42 total tackles from last year, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Really good numbers there. He's a big leader for this team. I think he's a big physical asset that can be evolved early on. Tim Keenan, I think, is really solid in the interior as well, who could be a big piece for this defense. Latham, I think, is a really good asset, 29 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 1 sack for him. Can Jamarian Latham step up? I think it's certainly possible. James Smith had a solid season at times last year, expecting big things out of him, 20 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and a sack for him. I think, Keelan Keeley, we're waiting to see what he can do. Can he finally break out? I think it's certainly possible. He's a big asset there. Q Rousseau is a phenomenal player that I love watching that can certainly step up, 36 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a sack, and 2 picks for him. A big asset against the run, expecting big things out of him this year. He can be a big pressure point for this defense. They got to find a way to get big pressure, early on in the season. I think they have to show some strength against the run, put some pressure, coming from that edge group there. This is a good unit that's got some really big physical players. This whole defense returns a lot of talented players, guys that got good reps last year. They got to put it all together. This is a good unit on paper, but they got to put it together on the field. I like what this defensive line can do so far.
Looking to the middle of this defense, we knew Jihad Campbell would be great last year, ended up having a phenomenal season en route to being a first-round draft pick. They returned 2 great players here, though. Deontay Lawson, I've absolutely loved his development over the seasons. I was very critical of him a couple years back, Nick, and you know how much I've paid attention to his improvements. A rangy lateral player with good acceleration. He improved play recognition significantly the past couple of years. He has stellar instincts at 6'2", 240. Has the awareness and coverage as well. Very clean player. Only one flag called on him, and was very impressive as a run defender. Justin Jefferson, very excited for what he's going to bring to the table. At times, he was their best player, despite being the number 3 backer, athletic freak. Needs to be more consistent as a tackler, but has good strength, nice power overall. Really ragdolls opponents when he makes contact. Really like his awareness. Has speed to be an effective QB spy as well. They also picked up Nakia Hill-Green from Colorado. He was a solid run defender, has some nice intensity to his play. He was inconsistent with tackling, though. Had 22 missed stops over at the Buffaloes last fall. Caden Jones, his second year as an X3 star. And they also have a top 150 recruit, Duke Johnson. Pretty good room here, top to bottom, Nick. I really wonder what Hill-Green's role will be, but I think Jefferson, this is the guy I'm singling out to be highly improved this fall.
Lawson and Jefferson are two incredible players. They are really good returning assets for this team. I'm excited to see what they can do this year. Lawson had 76 total tackles last year, 7 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, a pick, and then 4 pass breakups. I think that's a stat that's not really being noticed. 4 pass breakups. He's a really good coverage asset. I don't think people realize how good he is in coverage. This is a guy that's really physical, has really good football IQ, solid vision, can read the quarterback's eyes. I think he'll get a couple picks this year. I think he'll be a really big asset at linebacker. I'm excited to see what he can do. Justin Jefferson was the biggest breakout player for Alabama last year, a guy who we didn't really expect to get a whole lot of reps being that number 3 linebacker last year, but he stepped up and was involved in a lot of big plays. Was the 4th leading tackler on the team despite being the number 3 linebacker. 60 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him, plus a pass breakup to boot. This is a kid that's really talented. Love the speed on him. The acceleration's phenomenal. Really good high football IQ as well. This is a great 1-2 pairing here. I think this is a really strong linebacking core that is really solid. Hill-Green was a great add from Colorado, had some good experience there last year for the Buffaloes, can be involved. Then Duke Johnson, a freshman that they're very high on, that could be involved potentially getting some rotational reps, certainly against some of the weaker teams on the schedule. I love the linebacking core. Dare I say the best unit on this team? I think it's certainly possible you can make that case.
Now we look at the secondary for Alabama. This group was overall very impressive, but they did have a couple of games where they struggled in. Against Georgia in the second half, they couldn't really cover a mouse. Against Vanderbilt, Eli Stowers kept leaking out downfield, especially on those short yardage situations, and nobody was disciplined enough to cover him. South Carolina in that second half, they all of a sudden went berserk. And then the Auburn game, they gave up 300-plus yards, but, I mean, they were really just playing from behind the whole game. The secondary was relatively good, Nick. 13 touchdowns compared to 17 picks. I was very happy with Damani Jackson's improvements. Over at USC, he didn't showcase very good technique, and he wasn't very good versus the run, and he, across the board, was improved, and he was very good in coverage. Malachi Moore, of course, is really the only big departure. Alongside Damani Jackson, though, Xavier Brown comes back. He was a hard player to complete passes on. They picked up Cam Calhoun, who was phenomenal for Utah, with 10 total plays on the ball, showcasing those ball skills. Really good in coverage as well. Deshaun Jones, a good returning player. He can play cornerback for them. Will likely be the starting slot, though. Was a respectable player in his time last season. Red Morgan was poor, but he's also expected to battle in that slot position. The safety group was really promising. Keon Sabb was having a great year as one of the team's top tacklers. He wasn't as polished in coverage before the broken foot, but he's shown he can be an instinctive player in coverage and has aggressive ball hawking capabilities. 5-star Xavier Mincy can play a versatile role as well, and was a good tackler last season. He can be in play for the slot/backup safety role. My favorite player here, though, Nick, safety Bray Hubbard. He was a great breakout star back half of the season, showcased elite instincts, gets downhill with authority, such a hard hitter, really good ball skills. He's a great center fielder as well at 6'2", 204. He's going to be a future All-American. We talked about the secondary, Nick, and I was very high on them, but we also alluded they have a lot of youth and a lot of new faces. It didn't faze them at all. They were still really good for the most part, and I think this is very dangerous for opponents because they get pretty much everybody back in this secondary. They're going to be one of the nation's best.
You made a great point there, right? We were high on the secondary last year, but it was a very youthful unit that was replacing some incredibly talented players in Kool-Aid McKinstry, sending guys to the draft that were really solid for them. So this is something, and Terrion Arnold as well, who went to the draft. So they had to replace some talented assets. I think they were able to do so. They also lost an incredible player who went to the portal for them. So they lost a lot of talented assets early on from this defense. So they were able to replace those guys, step up, and find a way to get production from the secondary unit. It's a really good unit. Bray Hubbard was exciting to watch last year. 57 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 3 picks for him, 2 pass breakups. Really solid numbers there. I think he's a really good center fielder, like you alluded to there. Keon Sabb, when he was fully healthy, and I think he's expecting to be fully healthy this year. 39 total tackles, a tackle for loss, 2 picks, and 4 pass breakups for him. Really good numbers. Damani Jackson fit like a glove coming over from USC. 52 total tackles for him, 2 tackles for loss, 2 picks, and 7 pass breakups, which led the team last year. Really good numbers there. Sabian Brown had some clutch interceptions and played well in some clutch moments, certainly played really well in the back half, or the last drive that is, against Georgia. 18 total tackles for him, 2 tackles for loss, 3 picks, and 2 pass breaks. Really good numbers there. Deshaun Jones, I'm expecting big things out of him. He can certainly take a leap forward this year. 23 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 pass breakups. I like this unit a lot. This is a very good secondary unit that could really step up and be involved and really play good football. They had a positive interception to touchdown ratio last year. I'm expecting a similar one this year. This is a really good unit that caps off a really good defense for Alabama.
The defensive verdict, they remain talented across the board at all levels. Should see them be much better than the season ago, where they weren't that great versus the run, and they would get grinded down on as games went on. They have numerous breakout stars on this roster, and this secondary will really impress. So we see much better consistency in the front seven. I give it an A, but I think it also can hit an A+, Nick. Moving to the final prediction. Alabama's coming off a disappointing season where they played lots of close games, and they ended up blowing a CFP appearance when they lost to Oklahoma as pretty considerable favorites. They were going to be in the SEC title game, so there was a lot on the table there, Nick. At the end of the year, they let get away from them. The Tide should have a better cohesion on both sides of the ball. The return of Grubb's certainly going to boost the offense of a passing attack that I think will be much better. And, of course, a defense they'll be more forceful behind the secondary. They'll be one of the top pass defenses in the country. Nick, it's been far and few when it comes to me picking the losses for Alabama the last couple of years. You would think I'm a fan of them. That's how often I don't pick them to lose. But I think a 9-3 season is kind of where I'm leaning. I think they can go undefeated here, though. A loss at Auburn, it seems, like that's going to happen this year. At Georgia, I always make jokes to Georgia fans that they will never beat Alabama, and I think that's certainly capable. They don't beat them this year, even though I picked a loss to the Bulldogs on September 27th, and I think the LSU will come on the road and get a victory as well. I could be wrong on all these losses, Nick. That's how good Alabama is. They can certainly go 12-0, and I'd like to see this team perform. Interesting non-conference starter in Week 1 against Florida State. It doesn't matter if they win the game by 50, Nick, because that'll be more about Florida State than it will be Alabama. So it'll be a great test early on, though, in September when they play Georgia. We're going to find out quickly what this team's made of.
We're going to find out quickly. This team has a tough schedule this year, as do most SEC teams. No pick for me, as Alabama is my alma mater. I went there for 4 years, graduated, and I love this team with all my heart. And I watch this team week in, week out. I analyze every single play more than I analyze the rest of college football, because I'm very harsh on this team. I think this team is very talented, and I think this team could potentially, win the SEC this year with the roster they have. They return 8 stars on defense and really meaningful, impactful starters. They return a lot of talented on offense. I have a lot of faith in Ty Simpson and Ryan Grubb stepping in here. Get a very interesting game early on at Florida State. 3:30 kickoff. 2:30 Central was just announced earlier this week on ABC. That should be a really fascinating matchup. Florida State, there's a lot of question marks to them. We'll certainly talk about them in the future, but I think you're right. That means way more for Florida State than I think it does for Alabama, but we could see potentially Alabama put up a good result there. That'd be a good way to start the season. They host Wisconsin as well, a team they beat down pretty bad last year in Madison. That's a very interesting matchup. Then they travel to Georgia. I believe Georgia's on a 31 game home winning streak. By the time they play in September, it could potentially be 33, 34 games wins in a row at home. That's a really big streak that potentially Alabama could break there. They want to go in there and break that. That'd be a big key win for Kalen DeBoer. Obviously, he beat Georgia at home last year, but it's certainly a lot more difficult traveling to Athens. Alabama doesn't play a whole lot over there, but Nick Saban did have success in 2 of the games he played there. That blackout game in 2008 or 2009, and also a win in 2015 where the defense was absolutely dominant against the Bulldogs in that matchup. They travel to South Carolina. A lot of people would call that the trap game. That's certainly a tough matchup. South Carolina's homecoming will be that weekend. That's a team that a lot of people are very high on. We'll have to see how that shakes out. LSU and Alabama are always great battles. Alabama certainly has had a lot of success at home against LSU outside of the year where Joe Burrow came into town and won that matchup. That's certainly a game you want to keep an eye on. And then closing the year down at Jordan-Hare. I'm already getting nightmares about that. I mentioned that in the Auburn episode because things just do not go well for Alabama. It took a miracle in 4th and 31 2 years ago, and then a couple years before that it took a 4 overtime and a miracle drive from Bryce Young to get out of there with a win. They also lost in 2019 and 2017. Nick Saban struggled down there. They got some voodoo magic at Jordan-Hare. I'm already sweating that, especially if Alabama's in a position where they could potentially make the playoff with a win, or if Auburn's in contention for a playoff spot. That game is giving me nightmares. Hopefully Alabama will find themselves in a playoff spot before they head down to Jordan-Hare. The rest of the schedule, I think the home games are pretty favorable. I think they have a good matchup against Tennessee this year. I think they can beat Oklahoma, a team that you and I are both pretty high on. I think that's a game they will win at home. This is a very good Alabama team. I'm very high on this. I trust Kalen DeBoer. I think he's a phenomenal coach. The record obviously speaks for itself. Getting his offensive coordinator in Grubb, Sheridan had some positive moments, but he's a younger coach who still is inexperienced. So throwing him as an SEC coordinator into his first offensive coordinating role after being a tight ends coach for several years was certainly a tough jump. I think you have a more experienced veteran play caller in, plugging in there now in Ryan Grubb that will certainly help out this offense. If the offensive line can hold up and the running game is strong, the sky's the limit for this team. They could certainly run the table and win the SEC. This is a very talented offensive roster and a talented defensive roster for Alabama. Excited to see what my Crimson Tide can do this year.
That's going to be for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.